this is Candy with eyes2jesus.blogspot.com, and we are continuing on our study through the book of Daniel. And today we are up to Daniel chapter 8. So please follow along with me. If you would like to read the same Bible translation I am reading from the Young's Literal Translation. Now, we're kind of in not necessarily a chronological historical order at this portion of the book of Daniel, but in a chronological future order in the prophecies. And what I mean by that is chapter 7 that we studied last week, it went over the 4 final kingdoms, which we got an overview of originally in Daniel chapter 2. So Daniel chapter 2 helps us to understand Daniel chapter 7, which helps us understand Revelation, especially chapters 13, 17, 18, 19, and 20. Okay, so while Daniel chapter 7 gave us an overview of the 4 final kingdoms, now we come up to chapter 8, and in chapter 8, Belshazzar is reigning. He's the last king of the Babylonian Empire. During his reign, as we read about in chapter 5, is when the Medes and Persians come in and take over that second kingdom. So chapter 8 goes in and it zooms in on kingdoms 2 and 3, the Medes and Persians, and then mostly on Greek, okay, on the Greece Empire. All right, and then chapter 9 then goes in and does some review and then kind of focuses in on a bit of the 4th kingdom, Rome, specifically the end of the 4th kingdom being the 7-year tribulation. Chapter 10 is somewhat of a parenthetical between the prophecies. Chapter 11 goes through the Greek Empire some more into the Roman Empire and goes on into chapter 12, or the end of chapter 11 and into chapter 12 goes into, again, the 7-year tribulation during the end of the 4th kingdom being the Roman kingdom. So here we are now in chapter 8. Chapter 7 overviewed the 4 kingdoms. Chapter 8, we're going to zoom in on kingdoms 2 and 3. Now this is fascinating because we're going to get some stuff here in chapter 8 that you can match up with the history books. And it's like we're reading a history book here. But what Daniel is prophesying here hadn't happened at this point. This is during the Babylonian Empire, when the Babylonian Empire thought that they would still be standing for a much longer time, if not for forever. So this is when we're coming up to the Medes and Persians taking over the Babylonian Empire, and then after that, Greek taking over the Medes and Persian Empire, etc. So chapter 8, beginning in verse 1, we get our time stamp here where it says, "In the 3rd year of the reign of Belshazzar the king, a vision hath appeared unto me, I Daniel, after that which had appeared unto me at the beginning." So this is a vision that's related to the earlier vision that appeared to him 2 years ago during Belshazzar's reign that we read about in chapter 7. So this vision is related to the vision of chapter 7. Verse 2, "And I see in a vision, and it cometh to pass in my seeing, as I am in Shushan the palace, that is in Elam the province, and I see in a vision, and I have been by the stream Ulai. And I lift up mine eyes, and look, and lo, a certain ram is standing before the stream, and it hath 2 horns, and the 2 horns are high, and the one is higher than the other, and the high one is coming up last." Now later in this chapter it tells us straight out that this ram here is representing the Medes and the Persians. So it already tells us that straight out later in this chapter. So we know that this is a zooming in of the 2nd kingdom. Okay, now notice though that this time the Medes and Persians are being likened to a symbolic animal of a ram. As in chapter 7, they were being likened to a bear, and in chapter 2, they were being likened to the metal silver, because Babylon was gold, so the Medes and Persians were silver. Okay, now notice also though that this ram has 2 high horns. Horns, as we know in prophecy, represent power. These are high horns, so these are very powerful horns, okay? And that we have one horn that's higher or taller than the other. And then that the one that is higher than the other and the high one is coming up last. These 2 horns represent the 2 co-regent kingdoms of this animal. All right, and then these 2 of this ram. So that's the Medes and the Persians. At first, the Medes were more powerful than the Persians, But that soon got flipped, and the Persians became more powerful than the Medes, with the Persian horn becoming higher than the Mede horn. So that happened first, and then the Medes and Persians overtook Babylon. So here we see, okay, higher than the other, and the high one is coming up last. The higher horn came up last as a higher horn. So the Persians became more powerful than the Medes in the Medes and Persian Empire. So that happened, and then what happens? Verse 4. And I have seen the ram pushing westward and northward and southward, and no living creatures do stand before it, and there is none delivering out of its hand. And it hath done according to its pleasure, and hath exerted itself. All right, so then we see now the taking over, the Mede and Persian Empire taking over, becoming the second world kingdom after Babylon. And this was going to happen during Belshazzar's reign, as we read about in Daniel chapter 5 with the writing on the wall. Okay, so that's our zoom in of the Medes and Persians. The rest of this chapter is going to zoom in on the Greek Empire and some very specific people who are known historical characters, historical people you can read about in your history books, okay? So verse 5, and I have been considering, and lo, a young he-goat hath come from the west over the face of the whole earth, and none is touching in the earth. As to the young he-goat, a conspicuous horn is between its eyes. Okay, so now we have Greece. Now here, Greece is being likened to a he-goat, as to where previously Greece was likened to a four-headed leopard in the previous chapter. So here we see we have a goat, and it has this quite substantial, notable, very noticeable horn between its eyes. And it says about this young he-goat, over the face of the whole earth, whom none is touching in the earth. Why? Because this he-goat, the Grecian Empire, is powerful, and none at this point was able to touch it or bring it down or stand against it. Thus how Greece became the third world kingdom out of the four final kingdoms. All right, verse 6. And it cometh unto the ram possessing the two horns that I had seen standing before the stream, and runneth into it in the fury of its power. And I have seen it coming near the ram, and it becometh embittered at it, and smiteth the ram, and breaketh its two horns, takes down both the Medes and the Persians. And there hath been no power in the ram to stand before it, and it casteth it to the earth, and trampleth down. And there hath been no deliverer of the ram out of its power. That is when the Greece Empire overcomes the Mede and Persian Empire. Verse 8. And the young he-goat hath exerted itself very much, and when it is strong. All right, now let's stop right here really quick, because this talks about the notable horn between its eyes from verse 5, where it says that there is a conspicuous horn between its eyes. That horn, remember, horns represent power and kings. That horn is representing Alexander the Great. And Alexander the Great was a major conqueror, but he only lived until the age of 33. Okay, so verse 8, and the young he-goat hath exerted itself very much, and when it is strong, broken. So when it is strong, it's at its peak strongness, then broken hath been the great horn. And come up doth a vision of four in its place, at the four winds of the heavens. Okay, so now Alexander the Great, age 33, dies. So that is the end of that notable horn between the eyes of the he-goat. These four horns that rise up into the place are where the Greek Empire got divided between four different generals. We had four different geographical areas that were ruled. So now these four horns are the generals ruling over Greece and Turkey, or Asia Minor, Syria, and Egypt. So now we have those four horns. Replacing Alexander the Great is Greece, Turkey, Syria, and Egypt. Still the Greek Empire, but now we have those four horns. Kind of like how in our fourth beast of Daniel chapter 7, the fourth kingdom, Rome, that we have 10 horns that come up. And then Antichrist actually comes up and displaces 3 of those horns. Those are going to be 10 powers as well. So here are the 4 powers for the Greek Empire, and of course you can see all this in the history books. Okay, so now we have these 4 generals ruling Greece, Turkey, or Asia Minor, Syria, and Egypt. But then what happens? Well, verse 9. And from one of them, from one of those 4 horns, come forth a little horn, and it exerteth itself greatly toward the south and toward the east and toward the beauteous land. This little horn came up out of the Syria horn, out of the 4 horns, because this little horn is Antiochus Epiphanes. Okay, now verses 10, 11, and 12, they all 3 need to be read together as if they were just one long verse, okay? Verse 10 is going to talk about spiritually what Antiochus Epiphanes did, okay? And then verse 11 talks about what that physically looked like on the earth, and verse 12 talks about the repercussions of that, what came of that. So verses 10, 11, and 12 say, Yea, it exerteth, it referring to this new little horn, Antiochus Epiphanes, yea, it exerteth unto the host of the heavens, and causeth to fall to the earth of the host of the stars, and trampleth them down. And unto the prince of the host it exerteth itself, and by it taken away hath been the continual sacrifice, and thrown down the base of his sanctuary. And the host is given up with the continual sacrifice through transgression. And it throweth down truth to the earth, and it hath worked and prospered. So in verse 10, where it says that he exerteth unto the host of the heavens. Okay, so in other words, he's trying to go into God's kingdom and make God's kingdom his kingdom. He wants to be in charge of all. Okay, and then it says he causeth to fall to the earth of the host. That is the actuality, that's verse 12, where this horn throweth down truth to the earth. Because Jesus is the truth. This guy, Antiochus Epiphanes, he's trying to get rid of that truth, of the future Messiah, and of how God is a spirit, and they who must worship him in spirit and in truth. Antiochus Epiphanes is trying to erase God. All right? So that's how the stars, and of the stars and trampleth them down. That is representing he is trampling down the truth. And causeth to fall to the earth of the host is also telling us about in verse 11, and by it hath taken away the continual sacrifice and thrown down the base of his sanctuary. Verses 10, 11, and 12 are talking about when Antiochus Epiphanes begins to go after the Jews. And this isn't starting where he sacrificed a pig on the altar. This is actually starting approximately 3 years before then, where he began to have animosity towards the Jews, where he began to be aggressive against the priesthood, against the temple, and against the Jews. All right. So that is this going on. Okay. And then verse 13, Daniel says, And I hear a certain holy one speaking, and a certain holy one saith to the wonderful numberer who is speaking, Till when is the vision of the continual sacrifice and of the transgression and astonishment to make both sanctuary, the host, a treading down? So he's saying, how long is verses 10, 11, and 12 going to happen before that's done? Okay, and then here's the answer in verse 14. And he saith unto me, till evening morning, 2,300. Then is the holy place declared right. So in other words, evening, morning, the Jewish day begins evening, all right, at sunset. Evening, morning is a full day. And we have that defined for us in the scriptures in the creation account in Genesis. So it's going to be 2,300 literal days is what that's telling us. And that adds up to 6 years and 4 months. Okay, so did this happen? Yes, because in the year 171 BC, that's when Antiochus Epiphanes began to be aggressive against the priesthood, the temple, and the Jews. And that continued on until the cleansing of the sanctuary, which didn't happen until the year 165 BC. This was 6 years and 4 months that this happened. So this is historical, and it happened just as the Bible prophesied that it would. Now, continuing on with verse 15. And it cometh to pass in my seeing, I, Daniel, the vision, that I require understanding. And lo, standing over against me is the appearance of a mighty one. And I hear a voice of a man between the banks of Ulai, and he calleth and saith, Gabriel, cause this one to understand the appearance. So now Gabriel, this angel or this messenger of God, he is going to now explain to Daniel what Daniel just saw in his vision. Okay, so now verse 17 is the first thing he's going to tell him, okay? And he cometh in near my station, and at his coming in I have been afraid, and I fall on my face. And he saith unto me, Understand, Son of Man, for at the time of the end is the vision. Let's stop there. People take verse 17 and verse 10 and they think that this small horn must be Antichrist. But the scriptures are clear. We read about this in Daniel chapter 2 and Daniel chapter 7. Antichrist does not come out of the third kingdom, the Grecian kingdom. Antichrist comes out of the fourth kingdom. Antichrist is also a little horn. But the little horn Antichrist displaces 3 horns out of the 10 horns on the fourth beast. He doesn't displace or come out of one of the 4 horns that came out of the one great horn of the third beast here. All right. So verse 10, remember, is talking about the spiritual repercussions of verses 11 and 12. 10, 11, and 12 need to be read together. Okay? And verse 17, people think, see, that's the end of the time. That's the end of the days. No. It says, for at the time of the end is the vision. He was asked, how long until verses 10, 11, and 12 end? Okay, so you can parallel this to see that verse 17 isn't referring to the time of the end of days, it's referring to the time of the end of the vision. Verse 17 is paralleled with verse 26, which says, and the appearance of the evening and of the morning that is told is true. And thou hide thou the vision, for it is after many days. So the appearance of the evening and the morning is after many days. The vision, verses 10, 11, and 12. And after how many days is it? We see in verse 17. We see here backed up in verse 14, it is 6 years and 4 months, and that was fulfilled. So the end, that verse 17 is referring to the time, all right, for at the time of the end is the vision. That end has already happened. This was future for Daniel when he wrote it. This is past for us. This ended in the year 165 BC. This is not referring to the end of days. This was referring to the end of the vision of verses 10, 11, and 12. Continuing on with verse 18. And in his speaking with me, I have been in a trance on my face on the earth, and he cometh against me, and causeth me to stand on my station. See, we're not even to be bowing before angels. Verse 19, and saith, Lo, I am causing thee to know that which is the latter end of the indignation, for at the appointed time is the end. The end of what? The end of the indignation, it tells us. The cleansing of the sanctuary ends the indignation. The indignation is verses 10, 11, and 12. Verse 20, all right, Gabriel continues speaking, and he says, the ram that thou hast seen possessing 2 horns are the kings of Media and Persia. As I told you, this would tell us that. Here it is. Verse 21, and the young he-goat, the hairy one, is the king of Javan, and the great horn that is between its eyes is the first king. Now the king of Javan, or in Hebrew, Yavan, and Javan is another name for ancient Greece. So some Bible translations, such as the King James Version, will just say Greece here, but literally in the Hebrew it's Yavan, which is Javan. And Javan is a name for ancient Greece. Verse 22, and that being broken, so the horn between its eyes being broken, that's the death of Alexander the Great, verse 22, and that being broken, stand up, do 4 in its place. 4 kingdoms from the nation do stand up and not in its power. Okay, and again, that's Greece, Turkey, Syria, and Egypt. Verse 23, and in the latter end of their kingdom, towards the end of their kingdom, about the perfecting of the transgressors, stand up doth a king, fierce of face, and understanding hidden things. This is a small horn that came up out of the Syrian horn, out of the four horns that we just read about a few minutes ago at verse 9. And then we read about what he does in verses 10, 11, and 12. So verse 24, and his power, this is referring to Antiochus Epiphanes, and his power hath been mighty, and not by his own power. And wonderful things he destroyeth, and he hath prospered, and wrought, and destroyed mighty ones, and the people of the holy ones, and not of his power. Why? Because he is doing the deeds of Satan. This is Satan trying to bring up Antichrist, trying to take over the world, but it wasn't time yet. So Antiochus Epiphanes was a pre-type of the Antichrist to come. So the little horn, Antiochus Epiphanes, that comes out of the Syrian horn in the Greece kingdom is a pre-type of the little horn Antichrist that displaces 3 of the 10 horns that come up out of the 4th beast, the Roman Empire. So he is a pre-type, but he is not it, yet he goes after the people of God ferociously, just as Antichrist will. Verse 25, and by his, Antiochus Epiphanes, understanding, he hath also caused deceit to prosper in his hand, and in his heart he exalteth himself. That was a sin of Nimrod. And by ease he destroyeth many, and against the prince of princes he standeth, and without hand he is broken. So he's going to stand up against even God himself, even against the coming of the Messiah, but it won't work. He will be broken. He dies. Verse 26, and the appearance of the evening and of the morning that is told is true. And thou hide thou the vision, for it is after many days. 27, and I, Daniel, have been, yea, I became sick for many days, and I rise and do the king's work, and am astonished at the appearance, and there is none understanding. Because Daniel's going to see at least the Medes and Persians part happen during his lifetime. So he's kind of a little bit freaked out. He's seeing a pre-type of Antichrist in Antiochus Epiphanes, but he's also seeing the 2-horned ram that's going to overtake the Babylonian Empire to become the second kingdom, the Medes and Persian Empire. That's all for our study for right now. Have a blessed day.